Welcome to Bloor Central, friends. This is the YouTube version of Sunday Word for September 17th. Yep, I think it's September 17th. We are starting a new sermon series on the 12 steps, borrowing these from many of the addiction groups that meet in our building. And we're recognizing the biblical principles that are so, well presented in them, and we're working them together. We're actually going through the 12 steps. Even though you might not have an addiction to drugs or to alcohol, these steps represent a wonderful spiritual discipline for us to be working through together. So we hope you're joining us with that. This is the second in the series. We did the introduction last week. So if you want to go back and check out what we did last week, I encourage you to do that. And, these aren't going to be necessarily really polished videos. We're just trying to put this together to make sure that those that can't join us on a Sunday at least can keep up with the teaching that we're doing. And so this week, we're starting on step 1. It says this: we admitted that we are powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors, that our lives had become unmanageable. I'll repeat that again at the end of the lesson. But for right now, I just want to read to you from Matthew chapter 16. I'm going to begin reading at verse 21. So Matthew 16, verse 21. This is a record of sort of this conversation that Jesus had with some of the disciples. And he said something really powerful here. Beginning in verse 21, it says, "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life." Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said. "This shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." This first step, we admitted that we're powerless over our compulsive behaviors, is introducing us to a topic that does not come up in normal conversation. We tend to avoid speaking about our weaknesses. When people are, "How you doing?" "I'm fine." "I'm fine. Everything's fine." We don't want to open up about our weaknesses because those carry some pretty negative connotations. We're afraid of being labeled as weak-kneed, weak-willed, weak-minded. And weakness is linked with all kinds of labels that suggest that we haven't got what it takes. Losers are those that can't handle things. We're encouraged from a very young age. We're encouraged to make sure you've got a hold on things. Make sure you're in control. Be like the Fonz. I realize when I mentioned the Fonz that there's a number of people that, younger people maybe that have cut off. The Fonz was on a television show when I was growing up, and the Fonz was somebody who was always cool. He was tough enough. He was smart enough. He knew what to do. Nothing fazed him. I mean, we've had so many images of that as we grow up. It's not just the Fonz. It's Superman. It's James Bond. It's Jason Bourne. It's Clint Eastwood. That kind of strong, independent, in control. And that way, people are going to, recognize you as someone that, you're okay. You're hanging on. Sometimes we choose to just try and pretend. If we can't be strong and in control, then pretend you are. At least pretend. Don't admit that, your life is unmanageable. Sometimes it's not a matter of us, pretending. Sometimes it's that we've just blinded ourselves. In Jeremiah 17:9, it says, the heart is deceitful above all things. Sometimes we intentionally, our heart deceives us. We think that we're stronger or faster or smarter than we actually are. We just blind ourselves. And in what ends up happening is that this whole area of dealing with our weaknesses just doesn't get talked about. The bad news is we all have weaknesses. The good news is that there is a life to live beyond our weaknesses. We do not need to live under the burden, under the oppression of our weaknesses. Through all of these 12 steps, I'm going to be referring to John 10, verse 10, and Jesus says, I have come that they may have life, that you may have life, and have it to the full. There is a full life that God has available for each one of us. A life where we can fulfill the purpose for what we were made, that we can feel significant, that we can have a sense of accomplishment, all kinds of wonderful things that God wants for us. That's why Jesus came and died and rose again and ascended to heaven, so that we would have access to this new kind of life that is not controlled by our weaknesses. However, if we want to realize that full life, we have to recognize our weaknesses. It requires our humility. It requires courage, and it requires a brutal honesty. Acknowledging our weakness is really what we're talking about here in this first step. And without taking this first step, we cut ourselves off from allowing God to enter our lives and transform us from the inside out. We have to be able to acknowledge that we are powerless. I just want to take a few minutes to comment on some of these issues around weakness. I'm hoping that this will, be something that you can somehow connect with. It will help us to understand a little bit more the nature of the role that weaknesses play in our lives. When we talk about weaknesses, it's a very broad spectrum. And I'm talking about different areas, or I'm talking about those areas of our lives that continually defeat us. They mess up our health, our finances, our relationships. These are areas of our lives that are out of control, that somehow seem to suck the joy from us. Sometimes they're obvious, sometimes they're more subtle. And they come in many shapes and sizes. First of all, I want to speak about, the fact that when we're weak-willed, one of the exciting things is that God doesn't create us robots. He gives us a free will, and his desire is that as he gives us this free will, we will choose to place ourselves under his authority. And then God can actually guide us and provide for us and protect us and just, lead us into this full life. But there are many people that choose not to do that. They say, no, I'm going to handle my own life my own way. I'll do it my way, is what Frankie used to sing. Again, cutting off the younger people, I guess there. Sorry about that. But this is something that is a very powerful message in our culture, is we should do it our way. There are even those who have committed their life to Christ. They want to be, they call themselves Christ followers, and yet they keep, even though they say that, they still make their own, they still live life their own way. This ability to literally allow God to take authority is something that is one of our deepest problems. It's one of the sin problems that I spoke about last week. I refer to you, if you don't know what I'm talking about, again, I want to encourage you to look back last week at our sin problem. So many times when we try to hang on to our own will, we lose control. There are things that are just impossible for us. We find ourselves being pulled into behavior that we didn't intend to happen. You don't want to lose your temper every time you're on the road, but some guy cuts you off and suddenly you go mad and you're yelling and screaming at them. Sometimes it's not just losing your temper. Sometimes, we end up gossiping about other people. Sometimes we end up lying, and we didn't mean to, but it's this, when we try to control our own will, it goes its own way. And there are sometimes we find it impossible to control. We can't stay away from certain food. We can't, there's all kinds of different ways in which our weak will demonstrates that we're out of control. Many people, even spiritual giants, have dealt with this. We all do. Paul writes in Romans 7:15. This is a brilliant passage. I'd encourage you to read the whole thing, but it says this in verse 15. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. Our weakness is often a fact that we can't control our will. There's also those in our congregation that know about the weakness of addictive behavior. And I'm not simply talking about those addicted to drugs and alcohol. There are a wide range of addictions, all kinds of substances, such as food like sugar, caffeine, even medication like diet pills or prescription drugs, tranquilizers. It's not simply substances either. Sometimes it's a pattern of behavior. It's an activity. Pornography, gambling, computer games, social media, money, even exercise and sports. There's nothing wrong, but sometimes they take over our lives and we can't seem to be able to do without them. They take an unhealthy place. And an addictive behavior can be any hurt or hang up or habit that disrupts us from experiencing the full life that God has desired to give us. I know there's lots of them say, oh, I'm not addicted. I'm fine. I can do without it. I want to encourage you, if there is something in your life that you've wondered whether you are addicted to, I would encourage you to explore the whole area of fasting and to take a month and say, okay, I'm going to do without it for a month. And if you can't do without that activity or that substance for a month, then I want to suggest to you that, any excuse you come up with is going to be weak. You're addicted. It is a weakness. So we have weak-willed. We have people that are weak because of addictions. There's also this other area that I've read about where we do wrong things. We have some kind of understanding of what is right and wrong in our lives. We know that it is, for example, that, it's better to tell the truth than to lie. It's better to be honest rather than steal. It's better to be faithful rather than unfaithful. It's better to be honest rather than cheat. We understand, many of us have an awareness of what is basically right and wrong. Yet there are times that we fall into patterns of behavior where we're continually doing what we know is wrong. We continually lie. We continually cheat. And we know we're doing wrong, and yet for some reason we justify it or we pretend it's not important. But this reflex behavior where we're habitually doing wrong behavior can really create a bondage in our lives. It can be really hard for us to actually be honest and to do what is right. This feeling that we know we're doing something wrong can create all kinds of shame and guilt and despair. Perhaps you're dealing with habitual wrongdoing. The last kind of weakness that I just want to mention, this is not an exhaustive list, but I think it is gives us a glimpse at the different ways in which, weakness really can dominate our lives. Sometimes we have weakness like negative feelings, emotions that we don't want to feel. We don't even know where they come from, but we just can't help ourselves. Sometimes those emotions are things like worry, anxiety, fear, confusion. Even more powerful, anger. How many times in the city do we see people that are angry and they're just looking for a place to be angry? They seem to carry it with them all the time. Yeah, strong emotions like anger, jealousy, resentment. These are all things that many times we don't even acknowledge, and yet they create havoc in our lives, particularly with other relationships. So weaknesses come in different forms. As I say, we're weak-willed, weak with addictions, weak with habitual wrongdoing. Sometimes weak in the feelings that we carry and we don't seem to be able to shake. The way we cope with our weaknesses too, and I've basically already mentioned them. I just want to we don't all cope with weaknesses the same way. I think probably the most common way we do it is to put on a mask. We literally become actors in our own life. We just pretend that we're somebody we are not. We pretend we're smarter or stronger or more competent, whatever it means. And that way everyone thinks that everything's okay. I really want to warn you, living this kind of life where you become the actor in your life is very, very lonely. It leaves you disconnected with who you actually are. It leaves you alone in your weaknesses. Always pretending that you've got things under control is exhausting and painful. And it's a dead-end street. When we never face our weaknesses, we never give God or others a chance to help us through them. When our weaknesses are left undealt with, they begin to get a grip on our lives. The negative feelings that we continually suppress don't go away. They get stronger and more oppressive. That's why in recovery groups, you'll often say we are only as sick as our secrets. Unacknowledged weakness has a scary way of taking control of our lives and robbing us of the joy and the freedom and the peace of mind. The other one, I mentioned this one as well earlier, we deny it. It's denial. Again, where I talked about Jeremiah 17, the heart is deceitful above all things. We just refuse to see our weaknesses. We blind ourselves to them. And this denial allows our weaknesses free reign over our lives. And I see so many people torn apart by their lives fall apart, and they don't even know why. Why is my wife leaving me? Or why do my kids hate me? Why did I get fired? Why, we run into all kinds of things. And because we blinded ourselves, because our heart is deceitful, we live in that denial, thinking it's everybody else's fault all the time, that something's going wrong. There is, the fact that we have weaknesses, that's bad news. The good news is that as we acknowledge our weaknesses, we can recognize the power that they have over us. And that sounds bad, but it's not, because it's really not. Because it's only as we recognize how powerless we are that we begin to recognize the beauty of steps 2 through 12. We're going to be going on to those in the coming weeks, all of the other 12 steps. But this first step can feel a little bit defeating. But keep in mind, this is part of a process. We don't stop at step 1. But acknowledging that we are powerless over these areas of our lives that are sucking the joy out of us, acknowledging that opens us up to the possibilities of the future steps that we're going to be going through that have tremendous good news. So, what I really want to encourage you to be thinking about this morning is this idea that, if we want to hang on and insist that we've got our situation under control, we are blocked from progressing through the other steps. This is illustrated very much in those words that I read earlier from Matthew 16, where Jesus said, whoever wants to save their life will lose it. If you hang on to your life, you're going to lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. If you are willing to admit that life is, you cannot control these weaknesses in your life, and these weaknesses are creating a lack of joy or really crippling you, I want to encourage you to be seriously considering this first step, to admit that we're powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors. And I know there's a paradox for the whole thing, and there is a pain in us facing our addictions, but please believe me when I say that the benefits of going through this pain far outweigh what we're going to have to deal with as we face our addictions. I realize this is difficult for us to actually hand over control. We want to think that, we want to keep hanging on. I recently ran into a person, man, I've known this person for many, many years. I ran into them about a year and a half ago, and I have seen them, their life is a mess. They are continually running into problems in their relationships, with the law, with finances, with their own personal health. I mean, honestly, this person's life is so messed up. And they saw me and said, oh, I'm so glad I saw you. I'm so glad I saw you because I applied for this job. If I get this job, everything's going to be fine. Everything will be fine. I just need you to pray for me to get this job. And it was so, I sat there and I tried to listen. And I tried to encourage this person. But it's so difficult. Here's somebody whose life is completely messed up, and they think, hey, if I can just get a job, everything will be fine. insisting that their life is manageable. All they need to do is get this job. And they're treating God kind of like a handyman. Like their life is a mess, but if God can just sort this one thing out, and they think that by coming to me, I've got some kind of special power, that my prayer is going to, open up the door to this one job that's going to fix everything in this person's life. It's absurd. Their life was a mess, and they kept thinking, oh, if I can just do this, just do this. And we often treat God like that. Oh, if God could just fix this for me, if he could just fix this, if he could just... And that is not the relationship that God wants for us. That is not what the scripture speaks about. The invitation that God gives us is really wrapped up in Matthew 6:36, where he says, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. We don't want to put our lives together and then ask God to fix up the little lives. No, what we do is we allow God to shape our life. We admit that we're powerless. Lord, I don't know what I'm doing. I need your help to step in and to guide me step by step in how I'm going to, live my life with my finances, at work, with my family, with my friends, in my community, volunteering, everything. I want to be guided by you. When we assume that we can put it all together ourselves and get him to just put on the last little bit, it's absurd. Can you imagine that, if I was baking a cake and I'm putting all this together and say, hey, I'm baking this cake here. Can you finish it off for me? And you say, okay, yeah, sure. What do you put in the cake? I said, well, I put in some concrete, and I put in some water, and I put in some eggshells, and I put in a bunch of other stuff. Yeah, I just kind of threw it all together there. And they're like, well, those aren't the things that make a cake. Those aren't the things that you need. I say, no, just put some sugar in it. Put a bit of flour in it. It'll be fine. You can finish that. You can do that, right? It's craziness, isn't it? You can't put something together and then come to me and want me to fix it all up for you. There's certain ingredients that go into a cake. There's certain processes that you need to go through to create one. Well, I don't know what they are, but I know they're there. The idea that we can kind of put our life together the way we think it should go, and then ask God to fix it up later, is absurd. We wouldn't do that to anybody else if we're baking a cake. And what God is really saying, no, put me first. That's what Matthew 6:33, I think it is. Sorry, I'll look it up anyways. It'll be in the notes there. I can't remember. I think it's 6:33. Anyways, this is the way that we really can experience this full life, and it's summed up in step 1 of the 12 steps. It's that acknowledge, hey, I'm not in control. I don't know what's going on here. I don't have a grip on what's happening. So I want to encourage you right now, to just be considering this. Are you ready to come to the point where you realize, I can't control these things, so long as we're trying to hang on, so long as we're trying to say, oh, no, I think I can sort it out, and we end up trying to hang on, we need to recognize that, our do-it-yourself kind of improvements don't work. But if we can allow God to take center, but the first step of God taking center is for us to acknowledge that we are not in control. That we are powerless over our weaknesses. And so I want to try something really quick right now. I want to encourage you to be considering the step 1 of the 12 steps, that you would come to this point where you're willing to admit, yep, I'm not in control. And that opens us up to the steps that we're going to be taking in the next few weeks. I'd like you to just do an exercise here. We're going to try to do this on Sunday morning. I don't know how it'll work there, but maybe it'll be easier for you if you're just watching this. I want to encourage you to just take a few moments, once the video's over, take a few moments to identify a weakness in your life. Something that you know that you have a weakness with. I don't care how big or small, but just take time to acknowledge, this is an area of my life that I don't seem to be in control of. Now, it would be best if that is something you've never told anybody before. That would be the best example, but maybe you can't think of anything. Maybe you don't want to go there. That's fine. But think of something that you really don't talk to many people about, or maybe can't remember ever acknowledging before. I would like you to take that weakness that you acknowledge in yourself and share it with a person that you trust. Share it with a person that, you don't want them to fix. You just want to share with them, hey, listen, I want you to know something. I really struggle in this area. I've got a real problem with, a behavior or with a substance, whatever it might be. And then I'd like you to reflect on what that was like. Later on, after you've shared that with that person, you don't need to come to a solution. All you need to do is share it. Later on, I'd like you to reflect and just see how that experience makes you feel. You see, I want to suggest to you, I hate to fill in what I'm looking for here, but I guess this is the weakness of having to do this on video. As we identify these weaknesses and as we somehow confront them, I want to suggest that there's something very powerful that goes on. Suddenly, this isn't a hidden enemy that is eating away. Suddenly, this is identified. Naming a weakness brings it into the open, and it really disarms it. It disarms that weakness from, recklessly tearing apart at our lives. The second thing that it does, but it kind of separates us. As you identify what your weakness is, you're making room in your life. You're making room in your life for God to come in. That's what's happening in step one. When we admit that we're powerless, we're making room for God to move into our lives and to do some work. And so as you recognize this weakness, as you actually confess it to another person, that's actually it's giving room in your life for God to come in and to start offering healing in that place. And the third thing that happens is, as you share this, you've connected yourself with someone who can help you through it. You're no longer alone. That is the terrifying thing about dealing with weaknesses. We think we're going to be labeled as losers, and so we don't want to admit our weaknesses. But if we can go through this exercise very carefully, I'm cautioning you, you don't go out on a street corner and announce your weakness, but to spend some time identifying a weakness that you think would be important to confess, and then sharing it with, it could be your spouse, could be a good friend or someone you trust. There is a process that is going on there that we suddenly realize God's not going to reject us because of our sin. God doesn't reject us because of our weaknesses. The Apostle Paul also writes about this in 2 Corinthians 12, in verse 11. 9, 10, 11, around there. And Paul is speaking about a weakness in his life. And then he says that God said to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, I am strong." Another paradox. The paradox of step one is that as we confess our weakness, as we confess our powerlessness, we are opened up to a power far beyond ourselves, but it requires this very intentional step. 2 Corinthians 12 tells us God is not about to reject us because of our weaknesses. As we admit our weaknesses, we are inviting him in. That's the process. We see space created for God to work in our lives. The world's going to reject you. He will not. Our weaknesses are opening the door for him to come in and to be a part of our lives. But it's up to us to open the door. Step one, we admit that we're powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors, and that our lives have become unmanageable.